How do we build the grit, wisdom, self-control, inner stillness, the resilience it takes to recognize and face some of life's most tempting challenges? Let's talk about it.
It was wrong, but we wanted it, so we got it. And sometimes when we have that type of situation, we know that if we get caught, we're going to be in trouble. And sometimes that's enough to prevent us from making that wrong decision that we know is wrong, that the fear of getting caught or the fear of somebody finding out is enough to make us not do it. But there are other times where we still make that decision. And I'm not saying something that I can't relate to, that I'm just trying to make you feel. When I was a freshman in high school, there was this brand new game that came out called Grand Theft Auto 5. I bet you a lot of you have played that game at some point in your life, but it was brand new when I was a freshman. And everybody had GTA 5. That's what it's called, GTA 5. Every single person had it except for me. So everybody's talking about it, everyone's talking about how great it is, and then they'd be like, Coleman, what do you think about it? I'd be like, I haven't played it. And why didn't I have it? Why didn't I play it? Because my parents had a rule. Their rule was if a game is rated M, I wasn't allowed to play it. M means that it's for people 17 and up. Only people who are 17 and up can purchase the game. So my parents were like, it's that rating for a reason. You're not allowed to play it. And so I had to listen to their rules. And on top of that, when it came to a game like GTA, they were especially strict. They were like, you're definitely not touching that game. Like that one, for sure not GTA, and for sure not a rated M game. And so these conversations happened. I remember I was at cross country one day, and I had just gotten done with practice. We were kind of doing a cool down and stuff. And one of the guys who I ran with, he was 17. He starts talking about it. He goes, Coleman, what do you think about it? I said, I haven't played it. My parents won't let me buy it, explain the whole situation. He goes, well, dude, I'm 17. You give me $65, I'll go buy it for you. And in my head, I'm thinking, that is the wrong decision, Coleman. You know you will get in trouble if your parents find out about this. Your parents don't want you to have that game. You shouldn't do it. And out of my mouth, I said, when can I meet you at GameStop? And guys, a couple days later, guess what? I owned a physical copy of GTA 5 on the PlayStation 3 because that's what it first came out on. And I was pumped. But I also knew if my parents found out about it, I was dead. So I had to make sure that all my gaming stuff was kind of in a smaller room in the back of our basement. I had to make sure that my parents were gone out of the house anytime that I was going to go and play this game. So they'd leave, I'd hear the garage door shut, I'd open the garage door to make sure they were gone, close it, go downstairs, make sure it was installed, all that stuff, and I would play it. And I had to make sure that they would never find out about it. And guess what? They didn't. They didn't find out about it. Like I got away with it. They never found out that I had bought the game and I had played some of it. And the reason why they never found out is because I felt guilty. Like after a little while, I started playing this game that I knew I wasn't supposed to be playing. I started playing it while they were gone. And the fear that I felt of what if my parents come home, I don't realize they open the garage door, and they come downstairs and they find out that I'm playing this, I'm toast. And so after playing it for a little while, that fear was kind of stirring up inside me, I took the game out of the PlayStation, I put it in the case, closed it, and went to the top of these 10-foot built-in cabinets that we had, but they didn't go all the way to the ceiling, and I put the game up there, and I never touched it again. Seriously, it collected dust for years. Then later on in high school, when I was now allowed, my parents were like, you can play rated M games, so I'm playing Call of Duty with my friends and stuff like that. They still felt the same way about GTA. They said, no, you can't play that game still. And I remember after they started letting me play these games and stuff, and they were still saying, you're not allowed to play that game, I was like, all right, it's time for me to come clean. So I ran downstairs, I climbed on top of that built-in cabinet, and guess what? The game's still right where I left it last time I put it up there, and it was thick with dust. Like there was so much dust on it. I made sure to pick it up carefully so that none of the dust would fall off so I could prove to them, hey, I haven't touched this in years. It's been like 2 to 3 years since I last played this game. And I brought it up to them, and my dad had to get it, like wipe it off to even know what it was. And I was like, I'm sorry, I broke your rule. I felt bad. You can tell I haven't touched it in years. And I just needed to come clean to you. To this day, I have no idea what they did with the game. I assume they just threw it away. They probably could have made some money off of it, but in the moment, that very moment, I was like, I wanted to say yes to something that I knew was wrong. And I gave in to temptation simply for something that I wanted right now in this moment. You see, the idea of saying yes and no is simple. Yes and no are two of the very first words we ever learn, because it's two of the words that we hear the most often. Yes and no are basic. They're simple. They're clear. When someone says yes, it means proceed. When someone says no, it means stop. It's very simple. But sometimes when it's just us, when it's just us in our own minds, yes and no can become a little bit more complicated. And it's complicated because of temptation. Now, let's keep things simple, like yes and no, and define temptation. Temptation simply invites you to do something that may not be best for you. Anytime we feel the urge to say yes, but we think that we shouldn't, that's temptation. And temptation is a normal part of our lives. Every human to ever exist has experienced temptation at some point, even Jesus. And the fact that Jesus was tempted shows us that, yes, it's very normal. But also, yes, it can be very destructive. Now, we aren't having this conversation because I want you to get to the deepest, darkest secrets that you have, and I want you to spill all your tea and share with all your friends. That's not why we're having this conversation. I'm also not having this conversation so that you feel bad about the decisions that you've already made. My goal for having this conversation is to give you the opportunity to experience an incredible life that's full of joy. But in order to do that, we need to have some conversations about temptation first. So let's be honest. When it comes to temptation, 99% of temptation comes back to the same thing. 99% of temptation comes back to the same battle every single time. The battle of momentary satisfaction versus long-term happiness. Momentary satisfaction versus long-term happiness. Most things, not all things, but most things that we are tempted to do are so that right now, in this very moment, I can get what I want. Or I can feel the way that I want. I wanted to play GTA right now because I felt like I was missing out on something. So I went and accepted this momentary satisfaction, even though I felt the regret pretty quickly afterwards. And you do the same thing. You do the same thing on simple things, like you choose to sleep in and skip your summer conditioning because right now you're tired. But if you went to summer conditioning, it would impact you positively in the long run. Some of you might have just found that out when you were running around the circle. You will say yes to drinking one Saturday night because all your friends are there. But then it might turn into an issue later on in life. Some of you will say yes to that girl or to that guy right now because you want something. But in the long term, all you can do is look back and be filled with regret and maybe even a little bit of embarrassment. You will say yes to things that seem good in the moment, but if we can just take a second and look past this one very moment that we are in, it's made obvious to us what the right decision would be. The challenge becomes, what do I say yes to, and what do I say no to? And to help us figure that out, we are going to look at the Bible. The Bible is divided into two sections, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is the story of God's people before the life of Jesus, and the New Testament is the life of Jesus and then the lives of the people who followed in the way of Jesus after Jesus' death and resurrection. And we're looking at a New Testament book called James today. James wrote a letter to be read out loud to Christians who were gathered in the early church, a church that would have looked just like this. The whole point that James wrote this letter for was for somebody to open up and to read it out loud for everybody to hear. And in it, he is encouraging them in the good, but also warning them about the bad. And early in his letter, he writes this. He says, when tempted, stop for a second. Yes, this is the Bible, but we need to read this like any other book. We need to read this and look at the way it is written, the words that are used, so that we can understand the writer's intent. James is saying that when tempted, not if you're tempted, not for those of you who are weaker than others when your guys are tempted, not men when you're tempted, or women when you are tempted. He just says, when tempted, because he knows that you're going to be tempted. He knows that everybody is, regardless of who they are. If Jesus himself was tempted, you are going to be tempted too. And so he's saying that when you are tempted, that's everyone's cue to listen up. Because what James wants to say is going to be knowledge for every single person in the room. He continues and he says, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil, desire, and enticed. Now, to me, James uses two very interesting E words here. Evil and enticed. Evil, which means wicked, immoral, or just simply put, bad, which are a bunch of dramatic and extreme words, but simply put, temptation does not have good intentions. Temptation doesn't want what's best for you. Temptation, it doesn't care about your future. Temptation, it has no interest in making your life better. When temptation knocks at your door, and at some point it will, it's not there for anything good. The other word he uses is enticed, which means to be drawn in or attracted to. It's like a magnet that pulls you towards temptation, but it also sends you these little messages that make it not seem so bad. Messages like staying awake all night and playing video games, that's just fun. It's giving you messages like dating that person is not going to have any consequences. It's sending you messages like, well, one vape pen is not that big of a deal. It's sending messages like, I'm drinking, but it's just one time. Might be saying looking at that isn't going to hurt anyone. Temptation, it's sneaky. It's so easy to be tempted by something, and it's so easy to be tempted by something and not even realize what it is, what it's doing to you. And it seems harmless, and then all at the same time, the consequences can hit you. And I know what you're thinking, like, really, isn't that just a little bit extreme? Like, I get that you might feel like that this might be a little bit extreme, but let's look at how James ends his section on temptation. He says, then after desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Now, what you might be thinking is, so you're telling me that if I stay up all night playing video games one night, I'm going to die. No, that is not what I'm saying. But here is what I'm saying, that continually giving into temptation can lead to misery. The truth is that in life, we are all seeking freedom and independence, especially when we are in high school. We all want keys of our own. We all want our freedom, and we all want our independence. But if you continually give in to temptation, it can hurt your freedom. It can hurt your independence. When you give in to temptation, it can hurt your self-confidence. You feel guilty, or you can get mad at yourself for giving in. Maybe you wonder why you keep giving in to this temptation. Maybe you think that God is mad at you, and so you start pushing God away. You start pushing other people away, and you trade for giving. It might be a loss of your self-esteem or your self-confidence. You're throwing away a key. Trust can go away. Sometimes when we give into temptation, we get in trouble. We get caught. And all of a sudden your parents or your guardian, your curfew gets earlier. They start watching the things you're doing. They're starting to look at your location a whole lot more. And all of a sudden you can't do the things that at one point they had trusted you to do. Trust can go away. It can become more and more difficult to say no. This is how addiction forms. It starts with temptation. Something can just seem enticing to do once or twice, but over time, when it happens over and over again, an addiction forms. And just because you're saying yes to this today, your yes might be a yes to something else later on. It can become more and more difficult to say no. You're throwing a key away. Then all of a sudden, your relationships start to suffer. Your closest friends are not your closest friends anymore. That guy or that girl, they broke up with you because of the decisions you've been making. Your relationships start to suffer. It can become more and more difficult. I already said that one. Your physical and mental health, they can suffer. It can turn into something that it was one thing, but now I'm having these thoughts that I never thought I was going to have before. You're throwing another key away. And then your character may suffer. People are going to look at you as a different person. They're not going to trust you anymore. And all of a sudden, you start becoming this person that you never thought you were going to become. Your character ends up suffering, and we lose out on the freedom and on the independence that all of us desire to have. But here's the good news. You can say no to temptation. And it's something that you can actually get better and better at. But for now, just simply finding a way to once say no to temptation might be what it takes. And maybe no one's ever told you that you don't have to give into it. Maybe I'm the first one to say that, but God is with you and offers you a strength to resist temptation. God is with you and offers you something to resist temptation. You don't have to rely on yourself. You don't have to rely on your own strength, because God can give you the power that you need to resist temptation. But over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about ways for us to resist temptation, to push away temptation, how we can continue to grow in our relationship with Jesus as we continue to say no to the temptations that we face every single day. But those are going to be coming later on in this series. So for now, let's pray.
How do we build the grit, wisdom, self-control, inner stillness, the resilience it takes to recognize and face some of life's most tempting challenges? Let's talk about it.